saying, oh, they want to hear you sing some more. I think we're still in the book of Matthew, right? Matthew, there's one right down there. I put it down there. Matthew 13. And we're studying about the parables that Jesus spoke. Remember, he was telling them about the kingdom of heaven. And just by a little bit of review, the Jewish people and even his disciples were expecting him to set up the kingdom right away. That Jesus was going to overthrow the Roman government and set up the kingdom that was promised to David way back in the Old Testament. And Jesus is breaking it to him gently, saying it's not going to be the way you think it's going to be, that I'm going to overthrow the Romans. He said, but it's going to be through love. And you know, back in the earlier chapters of Matthew, he was telling them that I want you to love your enemies, do good to them that persecute you, you know, and those that hate you. So he says it's different than you think it's going to be. It's not going to be violence right now. He said it's going to be later on maybe, but not right now. And I want to go back just to let you know, you don't have to turn it. I'm just going to read a couple of verses. Now Matthew takes a lot of information out of the book of Isaiah. And this is what the Lord is saying. It's the Lord speaking. This is Isaiah chapter 55, and I'm going to read verse 7 through 13. He said, let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. And let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, and he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. And this is important. For as heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts.
Read number 10.
Where's the rain coming down?
I couldn't figure out what they know. I said, is that a car motor running? That's rain.
God's not talking to us this morning.
Okay, then this is important here. For as the rain cometh down, and this is good. This is good timing. Good timing. Yes, it is. And this is, you know, and the farmers love this rain, and we need the rain. And this is what he's saying. For as the rain cometh down, and the snow from heaven, and returns not thither, but it waters the earth, and makes it bring forth the bud, that it may give seed to the sower, and bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that for which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. For ye shall go out with joy, and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth before you into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of them, thorns, shall come up the fir tree, and instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle tree. And it shall be to the Lord for a name, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. He's saying he's going to bring the Jewish people, the Israelis, back to their land whenever the Lord comes to set up his kingdom there. Now, Jesus is trying to tell his disciples and his followers that it's not going to be now. Now, we get confused sometimes when we read the parables. We like to apply them to the New Testament Christianity church. And it's not just the church. This is over the whole world. Then I have another one here that I want to read to you. And this is just a couple of short verses. And this is in the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 2. And now I'm going to read from verse 43 on to 45. Daniel is interpreting a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And about this huge statue. And Nebuchadnezzar was confused of what that was. And Daniel's explaining it. It's going to be different kingdoms that are going to rise up after him. And he was a head of gold. And then it says that the Medes and the Persians are going to come in and overthrow Babylon. And then after the Medes and the Persians, then the Greeks are going to come in. And then after the Greeks are overthrown, they're going to be overthrown by Rome. Now Rome is more or less dissolved. Nobody defeated it. It more or less dissolved. But it says in the end times, there are going to be 10 kings that are going to come up over the European area. And they're going to form this pact with the Antichrist. But it says that kingdom is only going to last for a short period of time. That's where it talks about the 10 toes of the statue, clay and iron mixed. And clay and iron don't mix. Then it says about a stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, comes crashing down on the feet. And it says it's going to crush that kingdom. And it's going to have its own kingdom. It's going to grow and grow and grow and fill the whole world. Now, Jesus is that stone. Okay? Remember, and it says, several places it says, the stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone of the building. And so here, all in the Old Testament, all of these people should have known all of these prophecies because they had studied the Word, the Old Testament, in their synagogues and in the temple. They went through all of these procedures. And so Daniel is saying what's going to happen in the end times. And so then also in the book of Psalm 78, it starts off, I will speak to them in parables and explain things that they did not know that were a mystery from the foundations of the earth. And so now, to the Jewish people that he's talking to, the Israelis, remember the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that they were putting heavy burdens on the common people. And every time Jesus would go about healing, they would question him, saying, he's doing that by Satan's power. And he finally says to them, if I'm doing it by Satan's power, who are your people doing it through? And so they didn't want to talk about that. But anyway, the hearts of the religious people at that time had become so hard, no matter what he did, they were criticizing it. And so he started speaking to them in parables. And we already had that one parable of the sower. It went out to sow. And it was talking about the 4 different kinds of soil that the seed was sown into. Now, that word seed is where we get the word, or it's from the word sperma. Sperma. Now, everything that a seed needs for growth is already in the seed, except it needs soil and it needs watering. Okay? Soil and watering. And when we find the first 2 here, it says the first one fell on hard ground. And the birds, which are representatives of the wicked ones, the Satan's emissaries, came and plucked up those seeds off of that ground. Then it said the other one fell on stony ground. And the stones, when the sun came up, it was scorched and it withered. But I want to talk mainly about the third group, Okay? It says the third group, it fell on good ground, but there were thorns in that ground. And then here it says in verse 22 of chapter 13, it says, verse 22, he also that receives seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke out the word. And this is the verse I want you to see. It says, and he becometh unfruitful. Now, once a person has experienced the joy of knowing the Lord and studying his word and seeing answers to prayer, and then all of a sudden tragedies come into their life, and then they have difficulties, they sort of fall by the wayside. You know, that they might come to church every now and then, they might do this, but they're really not active anymore. And it says they become unfruitful. Now, I'm not saying they're lost. That's not my area. But it says their life is unfruitful. Now, you know, back earlier chapters, Jesus was saying, by their fruits you shall know them. A good tree brings forth good fruit. A bad tree brings forth bad fruit. If you go farther back to John the Baptist, he said, now the axe is laid to the root of the tree. You know, all the bad trees are going to be cut down. And what he's saying, he said, you people who are the leaders of the church were supposed to bring honor and glory to God. And he said he was going to send a Savior to you. And when he comes, you're going to reject him. So when you reject him, he's going to reject you. Okay? And so that's what we see in these parables now. He says, but the good seed fell on good ground, and it prospered 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold. And the thing is, fruit is really important in a Christian's life. He said, by their fruits you shall know them. And there are different kinds of fruits. You know, there's the fruit of the womb, who is, you know, the offspring of the parents. The children are fruit. And then also there's the fruit of the Spirit. It says the Spirit has love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, meekness. And then also there's the fruit of, I had it down here. Oh, there's also fruit that is artificial fruit. You know, it looks like it's good, but it's not. And we're going to see that in this next parable that I'm going to be talking to you about. And now, let's go here to verse 24. Another parable he put forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed into his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. And the servants of the householders came and said unto him, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in the field? From whence then did the tares come? And he said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? Talking about the tares. But he said, No, lest while you gather up the tares, you root up also the wheat with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, Gather you together, first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now he's going to interpret this a little bit later, because the disciples come to him and say, explain to us the parable about the wheat and the tares. Now, what I want you to know is that Jesus is telling his disciples, because back in chapter 12, he said, come unto me. First it was only given to the Jewish people to accept him. But when they rejected him, now he's turning to the whole world. And if you remember, when he was walking, before he would be in the mountains, in the wilderness, and the people, great throngs were around him. Okay? They came around, they were touching him, and he'd been bumped here and bumped there. And many were healed. But after chapter 12 and 13, when he was rejected officially by the religious leaders, they wanted to kill him, then he went and he said, whoever will come unto me, and I will rest you. And so then this time it says that he went out of the house, down to the sea. This is the beginning of the first parable there in chapter 13. Down to the sea, and he sat there. But when the multitude saw him there, they went down there to be with him. But then he stepped into the boat and drifted out a little bit, and they were all on the shore. And then he's sort of saying to them, that it's not going to be everybody touch me, you're going to get healed. He said, now I want you not only to be healed physically, but spiritually. And so this one here about the wheat and the tares is about the good soil that was produced in 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold. Okay, and the disciples are saying, where are these tares come in? And he said, an enemy has done that. Satan has somehow infected the hearts and minds of people, and so that they now join in with this group. Now, the tares, back there in that Old Testament, they would know what a tare was. The tare is the same thing as the bearded darnel. A bearded darnel looks exactly like wheat when it's growing up. And you don't know until they're getting ready to bud that the wheat has a white head to it, and the bearded darnel has black seeds to it. The darnel is highly poisonous, and it will kill you. And so back then, that's why he's saying here, no, let the darnel, let the poisonous plant grow up with the wheat. He said, because if you're going to pull up the darnel now, we still have little plants of wheat that are down here growing. You're liable to pull them up, and while you're pulling them up, you could be stepping all over them. And what he's saying in a picture form is that there are going to be people who believe in me. Some are going to be very strong, but some are going to be very weak. And if you go out and you try to get these false prophets and you sit there and accuse them and you sit there, then you're going to be arguing back and forth with each other. And these people on the sideline are saying, they're Christians and they're acting like that. They act like a bunch of wild people. So he's saying, no. He says, you let the darnel, the poisonous plant, grow up with that. And he says, you're not able to tell the difference between the good plant and the bad plant until it's fully furnished. He said, but I will send my laborers into the field, and the laborers are going to be the angels. But it's not going to come until the end of, they say here, the end of the world, but it's not the end of the world. The word that's translated end of the world here is eon, which really means the end of the age. there are different points of time that is the end of an age. For instance, back in the Old Testament, I hope they had coffee back then. But back in the Old Testament, between Adam and Noah, that was the end of an age. Because Noah was saved. All the other people, there were people that had trusted in God, but it was under a different kind of a dispensation. There was no law at that time, except for the fact that Adam and Eve were not supposed to eat from that tree. That's all it was. But they disobeyed, and because they disobeyed, that's how sin came into the world. And so then it just got worse and worse and worse, so God said, that's enough. He could only find one righteous person after that. There are other people, I'm sure, who trusted God during that period, but the majority of the people were extremely wicked. So he saved Noah and his family, and everybody else was covered in the flood. And then from Noah to Abraham, things started going downhill again. And so he called Abraham, and he said to Abraham, leave your family, everything, I'm going to make a nation out of you. And that turned out to be the Israeli people. And he told Abraham that I'm going to make you a great nation. They're going to go down into Egypt. They're going to stay down there for over 400 years, but I'm going to bring them out and do all of these good things for them. Well, even after God did all of that, they still rejected him. And that's what Jesus is saying when he said that these people, their heart is hardened. He said they have eyes to see, but they don't see and perceive. They got ears to hear, but they don't understand. That's what Isaiah said back in chapter 6. And he said, how long am I supposed to preach this? And he said, till they're carried away into captivity. Well, they've already been into captivity now, and they're back. So let's finish this one here. He says, whoops, I'm way ahead of myself over there. In verse 31, he said, another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of herbs. Now, a mustard seed, to those people, nowadays the biologists will say, the mustard seed is not the smallest seed. There's other seeds that are smaller. But it was the smallest seed that they knew about, okay? And when they planted it, the mustard seed would only have a bush about 3 to 4 feet high. But this one here is turned into a monstrosity. It says, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of herbs. Of herbs. Herbs are little things you can put in a box at your window here. He said, but this one, he says, becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. And he's saying this is going to be a picture of Christendom. Not just the church, but all Christendom. Those who are, say they're religious, but they're really not. They're offshoots of Christianity, and they become cults. So it's all of them. And the birds are like emissaries of the evil one, because they were the ones that plucked up the seeds out of the barren ground. And so he's saying, we're going to have people in the church, they're going to take advantage of the goodness of God and of the goodness of people. And the birds are lodging there, and everybody thinks Christianity is really spread out in all these people. Now, some have misinterpreted this, saying that it was like the words of heaven, the words of God, that you've got a you've got a Baptist bird, and you've got a Pentecostal bird, you got a Methodist bird, and everybody's having great. He said, no, 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 no. The birds represent evil. And so then he's saying, you're going to have hard times here. He says, and sometimes you're going to have a hard time seeing who's taking advantage of you and who is really wanting to help you. And he says, so that, remember he said back to his disciples, he said, I want you to be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. He says, just think when people are wanting to help you. See what their fruits are. And so that's why it's necessary to have the fruits, good works. There's the fruit of righteousness, as well as the fruit of the Spirit, as well as the fruit of the body, as well as the fruit of the ground. He says, so make sure you know what they're after. Because even Paul and Peter said, there are going to be people coming into your churches and into your fellowship. He said, it may even be some of you, who are going to be the wicked ones' emissaries to spread gossip, the rumors, the lie, to connive, to cheat, to steal. And so then he says, the mustard seed. Then I'll stop with this in here. And another parable spake he unto them, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till the whole was leavened. Now, here's a weird thing, is that he gave these 3 parables, and he explained the first one, and then the disciples went to him and asked him to explain the second one about the tares and the wheat, and he explains that. But the third one, and the fourth, and Jesus gave him other parables, and he said to him, do you understand these? And he said, oh, yeah, Lord. But, I said, yeah, Lord, I don't think they really did. Because now, some people think that the leaven and the loaves are good things, that the leaven is building up and it's going to cover the whole earth, but that's not what it means. Leaven is used 98 times in the scriptures, and each time it talks about evil. The leaven is like yeast. It puffs it up and puffs it up. We talked a little bit about that last week, the parents said, shh, don't slam the door, don't make noise, it'll fall, And what it is, it looks good from the outside, but you have to stop and think. The meal is made out of the seed, out of the grains of wheat. And so after they made the meal, they made in little balls, and this woman hid the leaven. Why was she hiding it? But some of these parables have associations with other scriptures that we won't go into bringing back, but they're in the book of Revelation. There are 7 churches that are mentioned there, and Jesus has a message for each church. He's given 7 parables here, and each one of these parables can be associated with those 7 churches that he's spoken to. But those 7 churches are actual churches, but they're also different periods of time of the growth of the church. And just to show you the one, here, this is the 4th parable here with the leaven. Okay, now if you would go over to the book of Revelation, it's talking about the church there, and it says that God had somewhat against them because they allowed that wicked Jezebel to bring in her doctrine. Her doctrine, if you go back to the Old Testament in the book of Kings, Jezebel was married to King Ahab, and he wanted a piece of land, but the seller or the owner wouldn't sell it to him. And he got upset. And here he is, king, and he's going pouting to his wife, I wanted that land and I couldn't get that land. And she said, you're the king, go take it. But he didn't. So she went and she got people to slander him, this owner of the land, saying that he was blaspheming against God. And then they sent soldiers, she sent soldiers and had him killed. And then she went to her husband and said, go get your land that you wanted, you know. And then she is the one who had the false prophets of Baal when the Elijah had that battle with the 500 prophets of Baal, and you know, the fire came down and consumed the offering that Elijah had. So the parables have association with books in the past and also books that were in the future at that time, because Revelation was not written at that time. But there's so much more into the Word of God. And what he's saying, and he said to the people, that to whom much is given, much is going to be required. And then he said, he that hath, to him will be given more. And he that hath not, to him it'll be taken away and given to him that hath. What he's saying is, even though your salvation is a gift of God, all by grace, nothing you can do to earn it, and we're going to find that out in the next parables next week, and nothing you can do to earn it, it's all free. He says, but you have to want to have it. And if you want to have it, then you will go like the disciples. They went and they said, explain to us this, and they wanted to learn, they wanted to hear, but the Pharisees said, we don't want to hear all that stuff, you know. It said, we heard it all, you know, and so they really didn't want it because it would mess up their current lifestyle. So here the thing is, we have to be careful in our churches. When we see somebody that we think, man, he's a Christian and he's doing that, you know, or we can't say that somebody's up there and they pray long and it's good and they're preaching good, because we have to take stock of their whole lifestyle, what it is. And then that's why Paul was saying to Timothy, he said, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And then over in Corinthians, Paul was saying, you know, search the scriptures to see whether these things are true or not. And so we want to say a person could be coming to church all their life and never really be a born-again believer, you know. But a person could come in right away and, man, they're a brand new Christian and they're on fire and they just haven't gotten, you know, we think, man, they're really weird, you know, they're on fire for the Lord. What happened to them, you know? So we have to be careful how we judge other people. Because the Lord said here, let the tares grow up with the wheat, and then at the end, now, the kingdom of heaven that crushes the feet, those toes of the newly formed Roman Empire, which is in process of being developed now, it says that is going to be Jesus, but there's going to be a 7-year tribulation. But before the tribulation, the rapture takes place and the church is out of here, and then there's going to be tribulation, and it's going to be another judgment. And then after that 7-year tribulation, Jesus is coming back with his saints and with some of the Old Testament saints. He's going to set up that kingdom, and there's going to be a kingdom of peace and righteousness. There's going to be enforced righteousness, because Satan is going to be bound for a while. And then after that 1,000 years that he's here, Satan is going to be loosed, and then there will be people who still had the old nature that did not die in that tribulation. There are going to be people who still have that old sinful nature that Satan is going to be released, and he's going to entice some of them, and some of them are going to rebel, and that's when Christ is going to destroy them all, throw them into the lake of fire, and then he says he will present the kingdom of heaven to God the Father, and the kingdom on earth will be the same as the kingdom, and the two will be blended together. Now, I said a whole lot, and I know it's a lot, but what I want you to know, there is a kingdom of God, and that's the whole universe. But the earth is the place that's rebelled, and so he's going to set up a kingdom of heaven here on earth, but he's going to get rid of the evil elements that are here, and then he's going to present that kingdom. That's what it says in the book of Psalms, sit here on my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Okay, so that's enough. But I'd like for you all to study the Word. And how do we grow